It was the kind of night that looked like it came straight from a postcard. Snow had been falling gently all day, coating every tree branch and rooftop in white, giving the whole world a soft, quiet glow. The cabin sat deep in the woods, far, away from the nearest town, tucked between thick pines and frozen hills. Inside, it was warm. A small fire crackled in the corner fireplace, and the scent of cinnamon and hot chocolate filled the air. Christmas lights blinked lazily along the porch railings outside, while soft carols played from a little speaker in the corner. The cabin belonged to Ben, a cousin who had invited his younger sister Lily and another relative to spend the holiday, away from the city. No traffic, no chaos, just peace, snow, and the quiet kind of joy that came with being completely off the grid. Everything had gone well that day. They had baked cookies, built a snowman just before the sun set, and laughed over old family stories. There was no Wi-Fi and barely any phone signal, but nobody really cared. The snowy silence outside was too beautiful, too peaceful to be disturbed. That peace, however, would not last long. Around 10:30 that night, just as the fire was beginning to fade and the cocoa mugs were nearly empty, something interrupted the calm. A loud knock came from the front door. 3 solid thumps. It wasn't hurried or weak. It was slow, heavy, and very deliberate. The 3 inside froze. Ben raised an eyebrow and looked toward the door, then toward the small clock sitting above the fireplace. It was late. No one should have been out in that snow at this hour. The cabin was at least 2 miles from the next house, and the road leading to it was almost impossible to drive on after the snowfall. For someone to arrive without warning in the middle of a freezing night like this, it didn't make any sense. Ben stood up and approached the door quietly, trying not to alert whoever was outside. Lily hugged her blanket tighter, eyes wide. The other cousin followed Ben, heart already thumping harder than it should have. Reaching the door, Ben slowly leaned toward the small peephole set in the old wooden frame. He held his breath and looked. There was a man standing out there, right in the middle of the porch, facing the door. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even shifting from foot to foot like most people would in the cold. Just still, completely still. A long black coat hung from his shoulders, too thin for the weather. His face was pale under the porch light, almost grayish, like someone who'd been out in the cold for far too long. But the most disturbing thing wasn't his coat or his silence. It was his feet. He wasn't wearing shoes. The snow around him had turned dark from his bare feet pressing down into it. Red patches mixed with the snow below. His toes were blue. No shoes, no socks, just bare, frozen skin pressing into ice. Ben quickly stepped back from the door. "There's a guy out there," he whispered. "He's barefoot, just standing there." Lily let out a shaky breath, and the other cousin took a step closer to the window, careful to peek out through the curtain without being seen. The man still hadn't moved. His arms hung loosely at his sides, and even in the dim light, his fingers looked too long, like they had been stretched by the cold. He wasn't knocking anymore. He was just waiting. After a long, tense moment, the cousin spoke up. "Sir, are you okay?" The voice trembled slightly, though trying to sound calm. There was no response. The man didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't flinch. He only stared directly at the door, eyes too wide, too quiet. Then slowly he raised his hand again and knocked. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. It was somehow louder this time, more threatening, even though it was the same slow rhythm. Lily whimpered and left the room, rushing to her bedroom down the short hallway. Ben stood frozen for a moment, then suddenly snapped out of it and flicked on the porch light with a click. The man blinked once, his eyes reacting to the brightness. Then, something changed. His face, still pale and expressionless, suddenly twisted into a smile. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was wide, too wide. His lips stretched unnaturally far, revealing teeth that looked small and strangely spaced. It didn't reach his eyes. It looked like a puppet being forced to smile. Ben took a step back. "We're calling the police!" he shouted through the door, though the words felt useless. No one had a signal. The phones had one bar at best. Even if they called, no one would get there fast enough. The nearest police station was in the town, over 30 minutes away on a normal day and maybe hours in this snow. The man didn't move. His smile stayed in place. Then, he opened his mouth and said something. His voice was low, scratchy, and it took a moment to make out the words. But when they finally heard it, their blood ran cold. "Let me in," he whispered. "It's cold." Those 4 words hung in the air like a warning, a trap, a trick. Ben bolted the door shut. The cousin stepped away from the window, and then the man was gone. Just like that. 1 second, he was there. The next, the porch was empty. No movement. No sound. No footsteps in the snow leading away. Just the door. Just the silence. And a feeling none of them would ever forget. The cabin stood in complete silence after the strange man vanished, leaving behind no sign of footsteps, no shadow disappearing into the trees. Nothing but the sharp bite of cold air that seemed to press against the windows harder than before. Inside, the fire still burned low, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls, but it no longer gave comfort. The warmth felt thinner now, like something invisible had slipped through the cracks in the walls and was watching. Ben double-checked the locks on the front and back doors, making sure each one was secure, his hands trembling slightly though he tried to hide it. Lily stayed curled up under her blanket in the far corner of the room, eyes wide and fixed on the window, while the third in the group paced slowly across the wooden floor, ears straining to catch any sound from outside. Minutes passed, then an hour. Midnight came and went, but sleep felt impossible. Every creak in the old cabin, every gust of wind brushing the walls sent shivers down spines and turned heads toward the door. The strange man's last words haunted the air. "Let me in. It's cold." They echoed, not just in memory, but in the quiet moments when all else fell still. It was around 1:45 a.m. when the soft tap returned. Not loud this time, not like before. Just a faint brushing, like fingers dragging across wood. The sound came from the side window near the kitchen, not the front door. Ben crept toward it, careful not to make a sound, and peeked between the edge of the curtain. No one stood outside the glass, but a shape could be seen shifting just out of the direct light, like a person trying to stay hidden. The porch lights had been left on, flooding part of the snow-covered yard in a soft yellow glow, but the figure kept to the dark corner near the edge of the woods. It was impossible to tell if it was the same man, but something about the stillness, the strange posture, and the way the figure kept slightly swaying made it feel all too familiar. Ben moved away from the window slowly, face pale. He whispered to the others not to make any noise, not to move. Minutes dragged by. No more tapping came. No sound at all. Just the soft creak of the old wooden house adjusting to the cold. Then, without warning, the knock came again. This time, from the back door. 3 slow thuds. Knock, knock, knock. Everyone jumped. The sound was heavier now, more demanding. Ben grabbed the fireplace poker, holding it like a weapon, his knuckles white from the grip. The back door had no peephole, and opening it, even to look, felt too risky. Instead, the small group moved away, keeping their backs to the walls, trying to stay out of view from the windows. The air in the cabin felt colder than before. Not from the weather, but from fear. True fear. A deep, crawling kind of fear that settled in the chest and made breathing feel like a chore. It wasn't just a stranger anymore. It didn't feel human. Something about the way it moved, The way it waited, and the way it smiled earlier didn't sit right. There was intelligence in its stillness, something patient and calculating. After a while, the knocking stopped. No movement came after. Just silence. For a few moments, hope flickered that maybe whatever it was had finally gone. That hope didn't last long. The voice returned. A whisper. A low, broken sound that came from outside, but somehow felt like it was inside the house, crawling along the walls. "Let me in. It's cold." The voice dragged the last word, stretching it like ice cracking across a frozen lake. Lily started to cry softly, covering her mouth with her hands to muffle the sound. The voice repeated the same words, but from a different direction. This time, from the window near the fireplace. Then again, from the kitchen. It was moving. Fast. Circling the house, whispering those same 5 words over and over again like a chant. "Let me in. It's cold." The voice never got louder, never shouted. It stayed just low enough to make the listener strain to hear it. And somehow, that made it worse. The third in the group finally had enough. Pulling out an old hunting rifle from beneath the stairs, they aimed toward the kitchen window and shouted out into the darkness, warning whoever was out there to leave or face the consequences. The voice stopped instantly. Not a single sound followed. A minute passed. Then 5. 10. Nothing. The fire crackled quietly, trying to bring warmth back into the room, but the air remained heavy. Suddenly, a loud bang shook the front of the cabin, not a knock. This time, it was a violent slam, like something large had thrown itself against the door. The walls trembled and Lily screamed. Ben rushed to the door and placed his full weight against it, though it hadn't budged. The others backed him up, bracing the old wooden frame with whatever furniture could be pushed into place. The door held. No more bangs came. Just that awful, bone-deep silence. The night crept forward, minute by minute, until eventually the sun began to rise. The strange figure never returned. The voice fell silent. When the snow outside finally caught the early light of morning, no footprints were found. None. The porch was empty, the ground untouched. And yet, the fear remained. Something had been there. Something that waited in the dark. Something that had knocked, whispered, and smiled with frozen feet on a Christmas night. And whatever it was, it hadn't come to celebrate. It had come to be let in. The morning after the terrifying encounter felt no safer than the night before. Ben, Lily, and their cousin remained in the cabin, too afraid to venture outside, too afraid to even relax. The sunlight tried to creep through the windows, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground, but the sense of dread in the air seemed to block out the warmth of the new day. Ben had checked the locks once again, making sure they were secure, and when he peered outside, he saw nothing but the untouched snow. No footprints, no signs of the stranger, no sign that anyone had even been there. But still, the memory of those chilling whispers echoed in their minds, and the strange, wide smile of the man lingered in their thoughts. They didn't know what it was that had come knocking, but deep down, they all knew it hadn't been human. At least, not anymore. Lily refused to leave the room, huddling on the couch with her blanket wrapped tightly around her, eyes darting nervously to every corner. It didn't help that every now and then, they'd hear the unmistakable sound of someone moving around, outside, or perhaps it was the wind brushing against the walls. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind made their hearts race, but there was no one there. Ben kept asking himself why the stranger hadn't returned. Why had it just disappeared into the night? He wanted to believe it was over, that maybe it had just been some kind of bizarre hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by the isolation and the cold. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was far from over. As the hours passed, the tension in the air grew. They tried to distract themselves, lighting the fire again, playing cards, and pretending everything was fine, but they couldn't escape the oppressive weight of the fear that had settled over the cabin. It felt as though something was watching them, something lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Around midday, when the sun was at its highest point, Ben decided they couldn't just sit around any longer. They needed to get out. They needed to know if the thing had truly gone. Maybe if they ventured into town, they could get help, or at least find some answers. It was a dangerous idea. No one knew the roads better than Ben, but with the storm still in full force, getting out of the cabin wasn't going to be easy. The snow was still deep, and the road out was treacherous at best, but staying put didn't feel any safer. So, after much hesitation, Ben put on his heavy winter gear and instructed the others to do the same. With one final glance around the cabin to make sure everything was locked, they stepped outside. The cold hit them like a slap in the face. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they moved slowly toward the truck, which was parked a few yards, away by the edge of the driveway. Every step felt like it took a lifetime, and every sound, the soft whistling of the wind, the distant trees creaking under the weight of snow, sounded foreign, somehow ominous. As they approached the truck, Ben's heart sank. The windows were covered in snow, the door slightly ajar as if someone had been inside. He couldn't be sure, but something felt wrong. He pushed the door open cautiously, checking the inside for any signs of intrusion. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It was as though someone, or something, was standing just outside their vision, waiting for them to turn their backs. After a tense moment, Ben started the engine. The truck roared to life, the noise somehow loud against the suffocating quiet of the woods. They set off, slowly maneuvering through the thick snow, the truck's tires sliding occasionally as they made their way down the narrow path leading to the main road. They hadn't gone far when Ben's stomach dropped again. Through the rearview mirror, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, in the distance, standing perfectly still in the middle of the snow-covered yard behind the cabin, was the same figure. The man, his face pale, his eyes wide, his smile still stretched unnaturally across his face, his feet bare, and his body almost glowing in the soft, weak light of the sun. Ben slammed on the brakes, the truck jerking forward with the sudden stop. "What the hell?" the cousin gasped, staring at the figure. It didn't move, didn't even flinch. It just stood there watching. Ben didn't know what to do. He didn't want to go back. He didn't want to face that thing again. But turning back to the cabin felt like running straight toward a nightmare. With a shaking hand, he put the truck in reverse, driving quickly, away from the sight, trying not to look back. They were silent for what felt like hours as they moved down the road, but the fear didn't fade. In the back of their minds, the image of the pale figure standing alone in the snow burned itself into their memory. The truck moved slowly through the snow, each mile feeling like they were getting further from the nightmare, but still not far enough. They needed help. They needed answers. Ben focused on the road ahead, hoping for a town, a sign of civilization, anything that would make the terror stop. But then, as they rounded a corner, something caught Ben's eye. At first, it seemed like nothing, just a shadow flitting between the trees. But then it happened again and again, like someone, or something, was following them. Just out of view, moving between the trees. Ben's grip on the wheel tightened. His pulse quickened. "We're being followed," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. No one responded. They couldn't take their eyes off the woods. They were all looking for movement, for something, anything that would confirm what they were seeing. But there was nothing. Just the snow and the trees stretching on for miles. The feeling of being watched was all-consuming now. They were not alone. The woods had eyes. And the man, the one with the cold eyes and the smile, was still out there, just waiting, just watching. The truck continued down the snow-covered road, the engine's rumble cutting through the heavy silence that enveloped them. Every minute felt like an eternity. Ben's knuckles were white from gripping the wheel, eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. The cousin kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, scanning the trees, the shadows between the branches, half expecting to see something, anything. Lily's eyes were fixed on the frozen landscape outside her window, her breath shallow, her face pale. The tension was suffocating. The cold seemed to creep deeper into their bones with each passing second. They had been driving for over an hour, but the sense of danger had not lifted. It lingered like a shadow that stretched across everything they saw. No town had appeared, no signs of life. The forest, vast and unyielding, seemed to go on forever. Then, without warning, Ben slammed on the brakes once again. The truck screeched to a halt on the icy road, sending a spray of snow into the air. The tires slipped on the slick surface, but the vehicle stopped just short of the tree line. The others jumped, eyes wide with alarm. In the distance, almost hidden behind a thick clump of trees, stood the figure once again. The man. The same tall, pale figure with that unsettling, stretched smile that seemed too wide for a human face. He stood perfectly still in the middle of the road, blocking their path. No movement, no sounds. Just the eerie stillness of a figure that was waiting, watching. Ben's heart raced. The air felt thick with dread, the temperature dropping further despite the truck's heater running full blast. They had nowhere to go. There was no turning back. The man had somehow found them again. He was everywhere. Ben's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He had to make a decision. He had to act. But before he could do anything, the figure moved. Slowly, deliberately. Its head tilted slightly to one side, almost as if it were studying them. The smile stretched even wider, making it look more like a grotesque mockery than an expression of anything human. Ben's grip on the easy steering wheel tightened. "Go, now!" he barked. Without a moment's hesitation, he threw the truck into reverse. The tires spun, struggling to get traction on the icy road, but Ben pressed the gas harder, forcing the truck backward. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching them with its unblinking eyes. The truck finally gained enough speed to turn around, the engine roaring as Ben shoved it into drive. He floored the accelerator, speeding away from the terrifying sight. They tore down the road, the landscape a blur, but the feeling of being hunted still clung to the air, thick and suffocating. No matter how fast they drove, the weight of the figure's presence lingered, following them like a dark cloud. Ben's eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man sprinting after them, but there was nothing. The road behind them was empty. Empty, except for the snow-covered trees. Still, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The truck's tires churned through the snow, the sound of the engine a constant roar against the eerie quiet of the woods. But then something changed. The air in the cabin became heavy, thicker than before. The oppressive silence of the snow-laden forest had been replaced by a low hum, a vibration that seemed to seep from the very walls of the truck itself. Ben's skin crawled. His heart raced. "What's happening?" Lily whispered, her voice, barely audible, as though speaking too loudly would summon whatever nightmare pursued them. Ben didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the road ahead, but his hands gripped the wheel harder, his fingers aching with the pressure. The hum grew louder, a constant, unsettling presence. It wasn't coming from the truck, but from outside, like the earth itself, was vibrating in a way that made his teeth ache. And then, from nowhere, a voice cut through the tension. A whisper. Soft at first, barely a breath against the wind. "Let me in." The voice was cold, familiar, like it had never left them. The same words, the same haunting tone. Ben's blood ran cold. It couldn't be. He didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again. The last thing he wanted to see was that face, that horrible, too-wide smile. But it was there somehow, in the back of his mind, burned into his memory. The voice came again. "Let me in." This time it wasn't just a whisper. It was louder, closer, as if it was coming from inside the truck itself. Ben's eyes darted to the side mirror. Nothing. The snow was still, untouched. There was no figure, no movement. But the hum, the voice, it grew louder, more persistent. Then, a sudden bang on the side of the truck made everyone jump. They all turned in unison, eyes wide with terror. A shadow passed across the windshield, too fast to make sense of. Ben slammed the brakes, sending the truck skidding to a stop. Thuntsa. The whispering, the banging, it all stopped at once. Silence. The stillness of the forest surrounded them, but it felt different now. There was no relief in the quiet. There was only a deep, consuming dread. Ben turned to the others, his voice shaking. "Did you hear that?" They all nodded, too afraid to speak. It had been too real, too close. But then Lily gasped, her hand trembling as she pointed out the window. At first, Ben didn't understand what she was trying to show him, but then he saw it. A face, just beyond the glass, pressed up against the truck's window. The same pale face, twisted into that horrific smile. Its eyes were wide, black pits. It didn't blink. It didn't move. The coldness of the smile seemed to seep into the truck, making the air inside even colder. Ben didn't think. He didn't care. He threw the truck into reverse again, spinning the wheels wildly. The tires screeched against the snow and ice as they tried to move backward, away from the figure, but it wouldn't let them go. The thing was following them, step for step, its face still pressed against the glass, its smile never fading. "Let me in." The voice came again, this time stronger, more insistent. The whispering words swirled around them, a constant drone that filled the cabin and rattled their bones. Ben floored the gas pedal, desperate to get away, but the thing never stopped. It was there, always there, waiting just beyond the window. Ben's thoughts were a blur. He didn't know what to do anymore. The thing was relentless. No matter how far they drove, no matter how fast they tried to go, it was there, keeping pace with them in the snow. The thing would never stop. It was never going to leave them alone. And in that moment, Ben realized the truth. They had been wrong all along. The thing hadn't been following them. It had been leading them.